Hi, and welcome to this tutorial where we will look at how to create a DynamoDB table inside a .NET Core 2.0 Web API. Before interacting with AWS, we need to initialize and set up a DynamoDB client. We will then use this client to access our AWS account. Let's get started. In order to interact with AWS components and features inside our Web API, we first need to create an AWS account. If you are unsure on how to do this, there is a great tutorial by AWS that takes you through the steps needed to create an account. The link is on screen now, but it is also on the YouTube description below. It is worth pointing out that AWS offer free tier services for the first year, so there is a lot that you can do that is free for the first year. Okay, so let's start off by creating a Web API project. We're going to name it DynamoDB and select OK. I'm going to create an empty template here. So first things first, we need to add a few things to our startup.cs file. We want to install a couple of NuGet packages, and those NuGet packages are going to allow us to create the DynamoDB client. So we're going to head along to Package Manager console, and we're going to say install package, and it's going to be the AWS SDK.extensions.net core.setup, and we're going to make sure we install it into our DynamoDB project. Hit enter. And we also want the DynamoDB NuGet package. So we're going to install package, and this is called AWS SDK.DynamoDB v2, and that's going to allow us to interact with DynamoDB. Okay, so now we've got our packages installed. We are going to quickly delete this app.run as we don't need that. We're going to add our MVC dependency injection. And apply it down here. Okay, so we need to set up the client. The client is going to be the DynamoDB client, and it's going to allow us to actually interact with AWS. So what we're going to do is use dependency injection, and that's what the package is that we installed earlier on, the AWS SDK.extensions.net.core setup. So we'll call that by saying services. Add default AWS options. This will allow us to set the options such as the credentials, what region that we want to select, and stuff like that. And we're going to say configuration dot Okay, so we want to store our AWS options in an app-settings.json file. But first of all, we need to be able to load that file up. So we're going to create a constructor, ctor double tab, and I'm just going to copy and paste some code now, which is going to load up the app settings file. We are now going to create a property, and that's going to be iConfiguration root and called configuration. Now we've created the configuration and been able to load it up, we want to create our app-settings.json file. So we're going to right click and select add, new item. Let's search for app-settings.json and we'll add that. We're going to delete the connection string, the default connection string, because we don't need that. And we're going to add some of our AWS options that we want to use. So you'll notice that we've got an AWS subdirectory here. where that is coming from, if we look back into the startup file and we look at configuration get options, if we right click there and say to go to definition, we'll see that default configuration section that it's going to look for is AWS. So inside here, we are setting a region, an access, and secret key. The AWS credentials, they prefer you to get it from a credentials file that's located in your user profile.aws. If we have a look at your users, myname.aws, I have a credentials underscore example. This would normally be just credentials with no example on it. Now if we have a look inside there, we have our access key and secret key defined inside this file. Now by default, this is where AWS will read the credentials from. Sometimes I want to show another option of how you can get around without using that credentials file, but just be warned that when you store your credentials in app settings, it makes it a lot easier for you to accidentally push it up to your repo and for other people to gain access and find out what your credentials are. So I'm going to add a little bit of a hack here, which is going to allow me to read it from the app settings.json file. So this is just setting up the environment variables and reading it from the app settings. Okay, so now that we've got the credentials and configuration all set up, we want to add the Amazon DynamoDB client. So we're going to say services.add AWS service, and inside there we're going to say iAmazonDB. And this is loaded up from that NuGet package, the Amazon DynamoDB package that we loaded up before. Okay, so let's create a controller that will allow us to hit an endpoint that will then interact with the code that we're about to write that will then create the Dynamo table for us. So let's right click. I'm going to be neat, so I'm going to create a folder here saying controllers. Right click, add controller. And we're going to call it DynamoDB controller. And let's create a method, which is going to be public iActionResult create DynamoDB table. Let's just return a generic OK at this point. And we're going to add our route to the top. And it's called create table. This to allow us to actually hit our endpoint. Okay, so now we need to create another class that's going to hold all of our logic that will allow us to create the table. I'm going to do a few things here. I'm going to create another project, which is going to be a library project. Class library.NET Core, and I'm going to call it dynamodb.libs. Delete the default class here. I'm going to right click and add another folder called DynamoDB. And now I'm going to create a DynamoDB examples class and a DynamoDB examples interface. So let's create the class first. And now we'll create the interface. We'll make sure that this interface is public, and then we've joined this, and also make sure that this class is public. Okay, great. So now we need to also make sure that we are referencing this project from our DynamoDB project. So we'll right click on dependencies, add reference. Great. Now, using dependency injection, we want to be able to inject the DynamoDB examples class. So let's do that by declaring at the top here, private, read only, and initialize that in the constructor as well. And we need to make sure that we add the dependency injection inside our configure services in our startup.cs file. So we're going to say services.add singleton. And we're going to reference both our interface and class. Excellent. Save that. Now heading back over to our DynamoDB example, this is now where we want to put the logic to actually create our table. Okay, so we want to declare the Amazon DB interface up the top here. So we're going to say private, read only, Amazon DynamoDB. Let me call it. So we actually haven't installed the NuGet package inside our .libs project. So let's do that now. So if we say install package AWS SDK.DynamoDB v2, and we make sure we have selected our .libs folder. Excellent. And we want to initialize that also in the constructor. Great, so now we can write the code to actually start creating our table. So let's create a method, and we're going to call that create DynamoDB table. Make sure all the parentheses and curly brackets are set up correctly. Okay, we're going to wrap it in a try catch just to make sure that if anything goes wrong, we can kind of catch the errors. And we're going to create a temp table. So we're just going to create another method that we're going to write our logic in. So let's put a console.writeLine at the top, and we're going to put inside there creating table. So when we hit this method, we will see on our screen that we are starting to create a table. So it will give us some more information that, hey, we've hit this and the table is going to be created. Now, first thing, we need to create a request. The request is going to hold things like the attribute definition, table IDs, and what the primary and sort keys are. So if we call it request equals new create table request, set the attribute definitions. We're going to new that up, so it's going to be a list. Okay, so these are going to be your table okay, so these are going to be your column names. And there's a couple of like attributes that we need to set here, an attribute name and an attribute type. So first thing, attribute name, what the name of the column is, and that's going to be ID for our example here. And the next one, the attribute type. So attribute types are like a string, or as in our case here, we're using an N, which is for a number. And our second column is going to be called reply date time. those in quotes, and the attribute type is going to be an N as well. Okay, so now we want to set the key schema. And the key schema is going to include what the primary key is, and what the sort key is. Attribute name that we want to set for the primary key is going to be ID. And key type, hash. So Amazon call primary key hash in AWS LAM. Amazon call the primary key hash. And we're going to set the range key, which is the sort key. Next, we need to set the provision throughput. This is how much read and write capacity you have for your Dynamo table. And finally, we're going to set what the table name is going to be. Let's set our table name up here in the field. Okay, so now we've created the request. Now we need to actually action creating the table while passing in the request. So we're going to say var response. And we're going to call our DynamoDB client. And we have a create table async, and we'll pass in a request here. So while this would work and we could now run it as is, we're actually going to create another method that's going to wait until the table's ready. So this is going to periodically check if the table's created, and if it is, then it will send back a success message, and if not, it will keep waiting and going around in a loop. So let's put here wait until table ready. This is going to be a method that we're going to create. I'm going to call it table name. Okay, so we're going to say string status equals null. Add a do. Set it. And we're going to do a thread.sleep up here. I'm going to set it to 5 seconds, put this into a try catch. So var response, So we're going to do a describe table here. What this is going to do is it's going to just check if the table is alive. And it's looking for the table name that we created before. And this is going to get the status of the table. I'm going to set an exception as well in case we run into issues. And we're going to say console.writeLine table created successfully. Okay, so this code, what it's going to do is just do a simple loop where it will sleep for 5 seconds, then it will try and do a describe table. The describe table, it will then get the result back, the status back from that table, and if the status isn't active, then it will continue doing the loop until it is active. So now we're going to say file, save all. First thing we need to actually do is create and put our public methods, which are in this class, inside the interface. So let's do that. Head back to our DynamoDB controller and let's call that method. Excellent. So when we hit our endpoint, then we're then going to call off to the create Dynamo table. Create DynamoDB table is then going to action all of the code that we've just written. So let's save. And also let's build the solution. Great, everything seemed to pass. Let's now run this. Let's grab the local host and the port number. Head along to my favorite Postman. And we'll use the endpoint that we've created. Select send. If we go back to our DynamoDB console, we can see that it's creating a table here. And we now have a success message saying table created successfully. Okay, so if we log into our AWS account and we head along to DynamoDB, we should now see our table visible in the DynamoDB tables. And there it is there, with our partition key set as ID and our sort key set as reply date time. Thank you for watching. If you liked the video, please remember to hit like and subscribe to my YouTube channel to keep up with all my latest YouTube tutorials.